This is my presentation on the suffrage movement for Dr. Kim, Social Work 316. The Declaration of Sentiments, which was modeled after the Declaration of Independence that was read at the Seneca Falls Convention, called for equal rights and full citizenship. The Seneca Falls Convention took place July 19th and 20th of 1848, and it is thought to be the starting point for the suffrage movement. The Declaration was read by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and it began by giving 16 examples of oppression faced by everyday women. Some examples of this included the following: the lack of women's suffrage, participation and representation in the government, women's lack of property rights in marriage, inequality in divorce law, and inequality in education and employment opportunities. It then listed 12 resolutions for change. 11 of these resolutions were voted on unanimously, but the 9th resolution, the right to vote, sparked controversy. The people were afraid that fighting for the right to vote would hurt their chances for the other resolutions. Overall, there was 100 signatures on the document, 68 women and 32 men. Interesting fact, if you look closely, you can see Frederick Douglass's signature that also appears on the document. Although there were 100 signatures, many withdrew their names after the document was made public because it received a lot of criticisms. And after the convention, many rivaling women's rights organizations and groups thought that they had a better chance of fighting for their causes if they merged together. One example of this is the National Women's Suffrage Association, which was formerly the National Woman Suffrage Association, led by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the American Women's Suffrage Association, which was led by Lucy Burns, Julia Howe, and Henry Blackwell. Many leaders rose out of the suffrage movement, one of them being Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's father was a New York Supreme Court judge and former U.S. Congressman. Stanton was well educated herself, and in her free time studied her father's law books in his office. This is where she discovered the laws that discriminated against women, and soon after this she began public speaking at events for women's rights. She was also a main contributor to the Declaration of Sentiments. As it was hosted at her house, she wrote the majority of the document, and she read it at the event. Susan B. Anthony is another example of a leader. She was raised as a Quaker in the faction religion Society of Friends to believe that everyone was equal under the eyes of God. As an adult, she toured the states, speaking at women's rights events, and joined the National Women's Suffrage Association in the early 1900s, and quickly rose up in the ranks and became a leader alongside Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Lucretia Mott got a job as a teacher at a boarding school where she used to be a student, and quickly realized that her salary was less than half of what her male colleagues were making. This is what sparked her initial interest in women's rights. She married James Mott, a co-worker, and began speaking tours to events concerning religion, social reform, temperance, and slavery. She attended the World's Anti-Slavery Convention in the year 1840. This is where she met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and they both connected because of the disrespect that they experienced from men at the event for their political views and opinions solely based on their gender. Alice Paul adopted her views from her mother, who was also a suffragist. She believed in gender equality, education of women, and women's rights to vote. Paul is the first college-educated social worker with a Ph.D. from Pennsylvania University. Mary Ann McClintock also grew up as a Quaker with the belief of everyone being equal under the eyes of God. Her husband, Thomas McClintock, had opened his own pharmacy in Philadelphia with a book section that had pamphlets about temperance and anti-slavery that they both handed out. They also participated in free produce sales, which was produce that had not been grown or harvested by slaves. Mary Ann McClintock met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Martha Wright, and got involved in the suffrage movement when they all attended the same tea party together, where she was introduced through her friend from church. Jane Addams was a college-educated woman considered to be one of the very first social workers of her time. Her father was an activist, politician, and single father of 5 when her mother died in childbirth when Addams was only 2 years old. Her passion began with children's rights and children's labor laws. She also established her work at the Hull House, which she co-founded and is thought to be one of the most famous settlement houses in America. She felt like she needed to branch out and use her education and skills to improve other areas of society. She then joined the National American Woman Suffrage Association in the early 1900s. Other social reforms that women were fighting for at this time included the temperance movement, abolishment of slavery, and gender equality. Women knew that if they wanted a chance at getting these new laws passed, then they needed to gain the right to vote for themselves. They realized they weren't getting anywhere with their old argument, so they changed their argument halfway through their campaign from equal opportunities and same rights as men to they deserve the right to vote because of their differences from men. The women's suffrage movement is known for its use of peaceful protests in order to achieve its goals. All of the organizations held similar events such as parades, street meetings, and speaking events. However, Alice Paul and Elizabeth Cady Stanton differed on opinions on what tactics and methods to use. So, Alice Paul and Lucy Burns broke away from the National American Women's Suffrage Association and started the Congressional Union. Paul and Burns thought it would be more effective if they focused their efforts on D.C. and petitioning members of Congress, while Stanton and Anthony held campaigns going state by state instead. The Congressional Union's most famous protest is called the Silent Sentiments. Paul and Burns, along with 1,000+ women, picketed the White House for 18 months straight and remained peaceful, while onlookers attacked and harassed them. Many were arrested, and while in police custody, they performed hunger strikes to further support their cause. The direct results of the suffrage movement ranged from the 19th Amendment, which of course is the right to vote in the United States regardless of sex, to more women entering the workforce, an increase in salary, an increase in representation in politics and government, and a change in mindsets for both men and women that women were more capable than previously thought. Although the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920, by 1917, 12 states had already granted women suffrage, and this resulted in the 18th Amendment getting passed, which was later repealed the prohibition. I believe that social work did have an impact. While Alice Paul was the only one who attended college for social work, I think social work is more of a mindset. To be a social worker, you need to be brave and have enough courage to stand up for what is right. Personally, I think all the women I talked about in this presentation, and even the ones I missed, show these qualities.